Rachel has been known to have said to her father, the only reason that I won't be running Daystar is because I'm a woman. Have you heard of that?
Yes, she wanted to be the one. She did, yes.
I remember texting my mom saying, I can't do this anymore. I told God, you feel the pain of my heart. Me and my child are ruining this family. And I said, I know, my God, you're protective of me. You'll get me out of here. That was my last night.
Someone inside Daystar recently made a statement that changes how this entire story should be viewed. They didn't point to Joni Lamb. They didn't blame Doug Weiss. They didn't even blame the board. Instead, they claimed the real battle has always been inside the Lamb family itself. If that's true, then everything we've been told about Daystar's leadership crisis may only be part of the story. Because behind the cameras is a reported succession plan, a family divided, and one question no one at Daystar seems eager to answer. Who was really supposed to lead, and what happened when that plan changed? Most people looking at Daystar's recent controversy searched for one person to blame. Some pointed to Joni Lamb's leadership after Marcus Lamb's passing. Others focused on Doug Weiss because of his highly publicized marriage to Joni. Still others questioned the board of directors and whether it had done enough to restore confidence. But what if those explanations only described the surface? As former employees, family friends, and longtime observers began sharing their experiences, a different picture started to emerge. Their accounts pointed to something much older than the recent headlines, a struggle that reportedly began inside the Lamb family itself. According to multiple public accounts discussed throughout this series, Marcus Lamb had reportedly expressed a desire for his son Jonathan to play a leading role in Daystar's future. At the same time, several former insiders have claimed that Rachel Lamb Brown believed she was equally qualified to lead the ministry. Those claims have become one of the most debated parts of Daystar's story, even though many of the details remain contested and have not been fully addressed publicly. That distinction matters. Because if the disagreement was simply about personalities, the story would likely have faded long ago. But if it was about succession, authority, and competing visions for the ministry's future, then every major decision that followed begins to look different. Leadership changes, board decisions, family relationships, public silence. They no longer appear as isolated events. They become pieces of the same puzzle. And one question keeps growing louder. If Marcus really had a plan for Daystar's future, what happened to it? And who ultimately decided to change the course? Every successful ministry eventually faces one unavoidable question. Who takes over when the founder is gone? For Daystar, that question became impossible to ignore after Marcus Lamb's passing. But according to people who knew the family, the conversation about succession had started years earlier. Several former insiders have publicly claimed that Marcus intended for Jonathan Lamb, his firstborn son, to play a leading role in the ministry's future. Throughout this series,
thank you from the bottom of my heart for bringing Jonathan into my life, into mine and Joni's life, and to our entire family's life. Lord, he has been such a wonderful son and such a godly.
Witnesses have described conversations in which Marcus reportedly expressed confidence in Jonathan's character and leadership. Those accounts have fueled ongoing debate, although the full details of any formal succession plan have not been publicly confirmed. At the same time, another narrative was developing. Multiple former employees have alleged that Rachel Lamb Brown believed she should be leading Daystar. One claim, repeated by more than one witness interviewed in the original series, is that Rachel remarked the only reason she would not be running Daystar was because she was a woman. Whether viewers agree with that interpretation or not, those statements have become a central part of the public discussion surrounding the family's internal dynamics. Then came the turning point. After Marcus's death, Daystar entered a new chapter. Leadership responsibilities shifted, executive influence changed, and the organization began facing intense public scrutiny. Questions weren't just being asked about who held a title. They were being asked about how those decisions were made, who participated in them, and whether the transition reflected Marcus's long-term vision. That's where the story grows more complicated. Because succession isn't only about one person's wishes. It's also shaped by corporate governance, board decisions, legal authority, and the practical realities of leading a global ministry. So before concluding that this was simply a family disagreement, another question deserves attention. Who actually had the authority to determine Daystar's future once Marcus was gone? And did that authority align with what he reportedly wanted? On their own, each event in Daystar's recent history can be explained away. A leadership change, a board decision, a family disagreement, a public controversy. None of those are unusual by themselves. Large ministries, like any organization, go through difficult seasons. But critics argue that the real question isn't whether these events happened, it's whether they form a consistent pattern. That's where the timeline becomes important. As more former employees began speaking publicly, many described similar experiences despite working in different roles and at different times. Some spoke about a culture where questioning leadership allegedly carried consequences. Others described growing divisions within the organization as key decisions became increasingly concentrated among a small group of leaders. These are their accounts, and many of the claims remain disputed. Then, there were the moments that drew public attention. Questions surrounding Jonathan Lamb's reduced visibility within the ministry, reports of disagreements inside the family, the controversy surrounding access during Joni Lamb's funeral arrangements, which became a flashpoint for online discussion, the sale of family property that some viewers interpreted as symbolic of deeper changes. Individually, none of these events proves a larger theory, but together, supporters of the investigative series argue they reveal recurring questions about transparency, communication, and leadership. Another overlooked piece of the puzzle is Daystar's governance itself. Many viewers assume that a board alone controls the ministry's direction. In reality, leadership transitions in large faith-based organizations often involve a mix of corporate governance, executive authority, family influence, and organizational bylaws. Understanding that structure helps explain why succession can become far more complicated than choosing a single successor. And that's what makes the next testimony so significant. Because it doesn't focus on board meetings or leadership charts. It focuses on something much harder to measure: what daily life inside Daystar reportedly felt like for the people who worked there. For years, viewers only saw what happened on camera: the polished interviews, the worship music, the messages of faith and hope. But behind every television broadcast is a production team, office staff, executives, and volunteers. In recent years, several former employees have publicly shared their experiences, offering a very different perspective on what they say happened behind the scenes. One former staff member described working closely with members of the Lamb family and said the atmosphere inside the ministry was often shaped by fear rather than open communication. Others interviewed in the original series made similar claims, describing a workplace where they believed criticism of leadership could carry professional consequences. These accounts represent their experiences and have not been independently verified in every detail. Some former employees specifically criticized Rachel Lamb Brown's leadership style, describing it as demanding and, at times, intimidating. Others disagreed with how decisions were communicated and felt the organization's culture had shifted over time. At the same time, no comprehensive public response has addressed each individual allegation, leaving many of these claims contested. Yet the criticism didn't stop with management style. Several former staff members questioned whether Daystar's internal culture reflected the Christian values it presented on air. That criticism wasn't simply about personalities. It was about whether leadership, accountability, and transparency matched the ministry's public message. Those concerns raise another important question. Every large organization receives criticism from former employees. That alone doesn't prove systemic problems. But when multiple people, working in different departments and at different times, describe similar experiences, observers naturally begin asking whether there are underlying issues worth examining. Supporters of Daystar may see these accounts as one side of a much larger story. Critics see them as pieces of a recurring pattern. And that brings us to perhaps the most surprising contrast in the entire controversy. While some former employees criticized the organization's culture, several of those same voices spoke very differently when they described Jonathan Lamb. As more former employees shared their experiences, an unexpected pattern began to emerge.
Some of the same people who criticized Daystar's internal culture made a clear distinction when speaking about Jonathan Lamb. One former employee described him as approachable, respectful, and noticeably different from the atmosphere they believed existed elsewhere in the organization. Another said Jonathan appeared genuine on camera, not because he was the most polished speaker, but because he seemed less concerned with performance and more focused on being himself. These are personal impressions, not objective measures of leadership, but they appeared consistently across multiple interviews featured in the original series. That contrast became one of the video's most powerful themes. On one side was the image of an institution facing questions about transparency and authority. On the other was a family member whom several former employees remembered more positively. Whether that contrast tells the whole story is impossible to determine from testimony alone. Leadership is complex, and different people can have very different experiences working under the same organization. Still, these accounts fueled a growing public conversation about what Daystar's future should look like. At the same time, another question remained largely unanswered. Where was Rebecca Lamb in all of this? Unlike Rachel and Jonathan, Rebecca has maintained a much lower public profile regarding the controversy. That silence has led to speculation online, but little verified information has emerged about her specific role in the family's internal disagreements. As a result, much of the public narrative has focused almost entirely on Rachel and Jonathan. But perhaps the biggest issue isn't choosing one sibling over another. It's asking whether the system itself encouraged accountability or discouraged it. Because when organizations become larger than the people who lead them, the real test is no longer who sits in the chair. It's whether anyone inside the room is willing to challenge the decisions being made. And that's where this story stops being only about one family and starts becoming a question every ministry should ask itself. At this point, the story is no longer just about Rachel, Jonathan, or Rebecca Lamb. It's about something much bigger. Throughout history, many Christian ministries have faced the same difficult test. What happens when leadership transitions collide with family relationships, public trust, and institutional power? Daystar isn't the first ministry to experience questions about succession or governance, and it likely won't be the last. Around the world, churches, ministries, and nonprofit organizations have wrestled with similar challenges, balancing family influence, board oversight, financial stewardship, and accountability to the people who support their mission. That's why this story has resonated with so many viewers. It's not only about who leads Daystar. It's about how any faith-based organization protects its credibility when difficult questions arise. Supporters argue that ministries deserve patience and prayer during seasons of transition. Critics argue that transparency becomes even more important during those same moments. Both perspectives point to the same truth. Trust is one of a ministry's greatest assets, and one of the easiest to lose. Scripture repeatedly emphasizes that leaders are called to be faithful stewards, not only of resources, but also of the trust placed in them. That principle doesn't belong to one denomination or one television network. It applies wherever people claim to represent their faith in public. And perhaps that's why this conversation has grown beyond Daystar itself. Because every unanswered question invites another. Every disputed claim invites another response. Every silence leaves room for more speculation. Which brings us to the final question. Has this controversy already written Daystar's future? Or is there still an opportunity for truth, accountability, and reconciliation to change the story? The biggest question surrounding Daystar has never been whether people disagree. Every ministry has disagreements. Every family faces conflict. Every organization goes through seasons of change.
The real question is what happens next. Will the unanswered questions about leadership, governance, and succession eventually receive clear public answers? Will the voices of former employees be addressed in greater detail? Will the Lamb family find a path toward greater transparency, reconciliation, or a shared vision for the ministry's future? Right now, no one outside the organization can answer those questions with certainty. What we do know is this. Daystar was built on a message of faith that reached millions of homes around the world. With that influence comes a responsibility that extends beyond television ratings or executive titles. It includes earning and maintaining the trust of viewers, donors, employees, and the wider Christian community. Whether you believe this controversy has been misunderstood or whether you think deeper reforms are needed, one thing is difficult to ignore. The decisions made in the coming months and years may shape Daystar's legacy for an entire generation. Because leadership isn't measured only by who holds authority. It's measured by how authority is exercised when the spotlight is brightest and the questions are hardest. And perhaps the most important chapter of this story hasn't been written yet. Because somewhere behind closed doors, conversations are still happening. Decisions are still being made. And the answer to the question that started this investigation, who was really meant to lead Daystar's future, may still change everything.